Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. Now, this is the 1-minute chart of silver provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. And you can see this very interesting activity that we had. Of course, we had the 8:30 in the morning economic reports, and you can see a rally, then a drop, and then kind of a leveling off there. But the big move came 9:30 to 10. We got this move all the way up around 10:30, and then a huge drop down. You can see a spike, and then if we move in real close, we can see that although it appears that the volume was buying volume, if you look very carefully, you can see this volume was the big blue spike here, and the next huge volume was almost twice as big, was that next blue one that didn't go, it went about half as far as the previous blue one. So that tells you that that was met with a huge amount of selling right there. And then ultimately what happened was it drifted down lower until they came in and smacked it really hard. So you can see a move up to 2060 and then all the way back down to 20. Now that doesn't really make a lot of sense, kind of irrational, until we go out to that 8-hour view and you can see the trend line. So once again, now this, if you remember the trend lines I did yesterday, I did 2 of them. This is the upper one, but you can see it is equaling a touch of that upper one and then a rapid resumption of the downtrend. So they are capping the price of silver based on this trend line. Maybe it's just traders, most likely not though. The same thing happened in gold. We can see in gold that it was capped and rapidly turned around and went down. Whether or not that same trend line comes into play, you can see not quite as close as silver does. It doesn't go back as far. We've got a couple of trend lines here. For gold, it's going to be about 1275 to get through the first one. The next one's going to be about 1350. So I wanted to continue with part 3 of Silver in Scripture. Now, before I go on with that, I wanted to clarify I had misspoke, and thanks to the members for pointing out to me that I had misspoke, and I was thinking of the denarius. That's because I'd done a series on the denarius before, and that's the one that's roughly equal to a silver dime. Now the shekel is going to be about 9 to 10 grams. We don't know for sure. I went through all the material, and it's going to be roughly a silver quarter to a $1/2. We don't know, or anywhere in between. So a quarter to a third to a half an ounce of silver. Doesn't make a really big difference, but some difference on some of the calculations. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about the values that we were talking about yesterday. So we're going to look at some more values today. Another thing where I misspoke, I was talking about the silver instructions. Sorry about that. The silver instructions for the use in the tabernacle. Now, that was the sockets and the fillets, etc. That is totally different than the use of silver in the temple. So the instructions given in the law were for the tabernacle. I hope that wasn't confusing. So let's get to the verses. Again, we're going to be looking at those verses that give us a value. So we're skipping over a lot of verses. I'm not going into the deep meaning. I'm going to talk a little bit about wealth at the end, but I'm mainly looking for verses that give us an idea of the value of silver relative to other goods and services. So the first verse we have here comes in 2 Chronicles 25:6, and this is a king, Amaziah, and he hired an army. It says he hired also 100,000 mighty men of valor out of Israel for 100 talents of silver. So this is the price of an army. Now remember that there are 3,000 shekels in the talent. So we're talking about 300,000 talents. And if we do the math on that, we'll just say it's a half ounce. It's going to come to about $3 million if we value it according to today's value. Divided by that army, and you're talking about $30 a man. So could you field an army of 100,000 men today by paying each of them $30? I don't think so. What's that off by? A factor of 10? Maybe a factor of 100? Maybe $3,000 to go fight in an army? So, don't know. Just a rough guesstimate of what that might be. The next verse is from Jeremiah, and he is instructed to purchase a field and mark it down and have evidences for that. And the Lord's trying to prove that houses and vineyards will be possessed again in the land, and he is to do that as a sign to them. But we can see the price here is the field of Hanameel. This is Jeremiah 32:9. My uncle's son that was in Anathoth, and weighed him the money, even 17 shekels of silver. So here's a field, we'll say the half an ounce value in today's money, that's $170 for a field. Do you know of any fields that you could get for $170? Is it off by a factor of 10? Is it off by a factor of 100? Kind of like the last one. Next verse, this is from Ezekiel. We're actually going to revisit this in the end when we look at Revelation. This is one that's often quoted, especially to Christians who buy and stack silver. And it says, they shall cast their silver in the streets, their gold shall be removed, their silver and gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. So we're going to come back to that one when we look at Revelation. The next verse we want to look at is from Hosea. Now, if you're not familiar with Hosea, Hosea was a prophet who was told to marry a harlot, and a woman who was an adulteress and actually sold herself into harlotry and had to be purchased back by Hosea, and God was trying to demonstrate to him what it's like to be married to an unfaithful person, and that's what it is like for God. So the price of this woman, I believe it was Gomer, that Hosea purchased, was 15 pieces of silver. That's how much money it took to redeem her back. Also for a homer of barley and a half homer of barley. If you remember, the price of a slave that we saw for Joseph was 20, and that was pieces of silver. Again, this isn't shekels, but I'm probably going to assume that it is shekels. So that's fairly close to the price that we saw for Joseph. The next verse we want to look at is out of the Gospels. Now this verse is a little bit different because this is out of a parable, we'll say. This actually isn't a parable. Maybe more, I'm not sure the term, maybe more a simile. He's not telling a story, but just give an example. Christ says, either what woman having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house and diligently seek till she find it? And when she hath found it, she calleth her friends and her neighbors together. Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I had lost. And of course he's using that as an example of the joy over one sinner who repents. But the point here is the relative value. So we can see this woman, perhaps this 10 pieces of silver was her entire net worth. We don't know. Maybe this was all the money she had. She lost a tenth of that. She lost one piece. Let's say maybe it's a shekel. Maybe it's an ounce. We'll just go with shekel. So in today's money, she had $100 and she lost 10 of it. So we can see what she did. She lighted a candle and she sweeps the entire house and she searches diligently until she finds it. And when she has found it, she calls her friends and her neighbors and throws a party because she found one piece of silver. Now, does that sound to you like that piece of silver is worth $10? Maybe 10, maybe 100 times that. Now, before we get to Revelation and Jeremiah, I told you I was going to talk a little bit about Solomon. And actually, when we get to Solomon, we see in this verse about Solomon's riches. This is 1 Kings chapter 10. This is right after Solomon is visited by the Queen of Sheba. This is the height of his kingdom. And, of course, this is right before the decline. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents. 666. Beside that, he had the merchantmen and the traffic. That's an important word that has to do with the fall of Satan, of the spice merchants and all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went to one target. He made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went into one shield, and the king put them in the house in the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps. The top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side, the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays, and 12 lions stood there on the side, and on the other side, upon the 6 steps, there was not the like made in any kingdom. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and wisdom, and all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. And they brought every man his presents, vessels of silver, vessels of gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, mules, a rate year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. And he had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots, and with the king at Jerusalem. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and the cedars he made to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt, and linen yarn, and the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. And a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites and for the kings of Syria, they did bring them out by their means. So that is the pinnacle, and there's some signs there that we're going to see a decline next, and sure enough we see it. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And it goes into his 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. So Solomon crossed that point. We can see the symbolism there with the 666 talents of gold coming in that year. And we can go back and read the warning that was given in Deuteronomy when God warned them about having a king, what he should do. He said, this is in Deuteronomy 17, verse 14, When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So you can see that, and we can see in the next verse, that when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write his own copy of this law. So the king was required to actually write out the entire law in a book, and it was to be with him, and he shall read it therein all the days of his life. Now I don't know whether Solomon did that or not, but I know that these three things that are outlined here, he violated in this pinnacle where he reached the height in wealth probably that's ever been known in the world. So that kind of segues us into the point that we get when we're looking at Jeremiah. I'm sorry, that was Ezekiel, with this verse, that they shall cast their silver in the streets, their gold shall be removed, their silver and gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. Now, we've been told about the love of money. A lot of people say that people shouldn't put their savings into silver and gold. That's not what this is talking about. It's actually talking about the end time. And the verse we want to look to for that is going to be this judgment of Babylon, the great city of Babylon, at the very end time. And of course, at that point, that's when all these things do actually become worthless. But they're listed in an order of worth. The merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. And here's the order. I'm going to assume that the first list is in order of value, but then we can see that it goes down to men being at the very bottom of the list. Now that's very interesting, but we can see that gold is at the top of the list. One might say something like, this is the way men value things, and this is the way God values things. He sees more value in men and slaves and animals than he does in these things that men value. But nevertheless, the things that men value, the top two are gold and silver. Next are precious stones and pearls. Then we have fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet. Then we have thyine wood and all manner vessels of ivory, manner vessels of most precious wood. Then we have brass, iron, and marble. So that is the listing. Then, of course, we have spices next, and the others. So that is the value of the things that were being trafficked. Now, Solomon was approaching that kind of level of trafficking in wealth. And, of course, we know that that's a sign of evil, the love of money, and that is what Babylon ultimately becomes. But very important to understand here that gold and silver are clearly, up to the very end, the two most valuable pieces of merchandise, we'll say, on the earth. They're definitely still money all the way up to the very end. So that's the summary of the verses that I can come up, that I think are relevant, I can come up with to give you an idea of what silver is really worth according to the Bible. Those three verses, it seemed to me definitely the case that based on today's prices and what they valued things at, that silver is anywhere from 10 to 100 times undervalued. And that's going to give silver a price of roughly $200 to $2,000 an ounce of what silver should be priced at right now if silver is valued at the value that it was valued in those days. Now again, that's just a guesstimate, that's just my opinion. Also remember that there's much less silver today. There's much less silver today than there was 10 years ago. Much less than 20 years ago. Much less than when the hunts were around. And it was already growing thin at that point because in 64 they had to take us off of it. So even much less than there was in World War II. So that factor of 10 or 100-fold may be off by a factor of 10 or 100-fold because so much of the silver is gone that the historical ratios no longer hold. We'll have to wait and see where silver goes when it eventually does reach its true value. And we'll talk to you next time.